Welcome to the At the Coalface podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. This podcast is all about what it's really like in the trenches of digital and e-commerce. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the At the Coalface podcast. It's absolutely my pleasure to welcome Fern Jones-Middleton from Omnivore to the podcast. Welcome, Fern.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And it's funny, the way we met, we were talking a little bit before, but I remember when I was at HealthPost and we were looking for an omnichannel tool at that point. And I was doing some research on omnichannel tools because I was running e-commerce for HealthPost at that point. And we came across you guys. We had a couple of phone conversations. You, me, and Ivan had a couple of phone conversations. And then I ended up going to, I think it was Online Retailer was the next conference in Australia that we went to, and we had a chance to meet. You had a booth there, and we had a chance to meet in person for the very first time. And this is probably going back, probably a good 6 years ago.
Yes, it's amazing how quickly things go.
Time flies when you're having fun in e-commerce, right? Awesome stuff. Now, you are the COO and general boss lady of Omnivore, and you do a lot of stuff. COO is a catch-all title, but you really do a ton of things at Omnivore, and which is a City Beach software company. Yep. And if we talk about Omnivore specifically, Omnivore is an omni-channel listing and product feed engine tool. Yeah,
sure is. Yeah.
And look, it's an interesting space because what at least what I've observed in the industry over the last, say, decade is that what started out as an extremely niche piece of software where there was only one, maybe two players. We think of the very early days of Channel Advisor and some of the other, even Go Data Feed, which was in the game pretty early on. There were some real specialist players in this space before we even really knew what omnichannel was ultimately going to mean. And in those early days, it was an absolute fortune to onboard these technologies into any business. It took months and months to onboard them into a business. There weren't a ton of out-of-the-box connectors with e-commerce platforms and ERP and marketplaces and the like. And so a lot of that stuff was pretty bespoke early on, and it was really complex, really difficult, and really expensive. Was that your experience early on in the very early days?
Yes, it's, as you say, we connect, online retailers to marketplaces. And if I might just mention how we started, Ivan Logan, our founder of Omnivore and City Beach Software, he used to work at Westfield and worked on the first Westfield marketplace many years ago. Westfield have since relaunched a new marketplace, Westfield Direct, but about 10, 12 years ago, about 12, maybe nearly, about 12 years ago, they did the initial marketplace. And one of the challenges there was just getting retailers onto it. And Ivan left Westfield and had a bit of a brainwave, and Westfield contacted him and asked us could he start looking at onboarding retailers. And the first retailer we got onto Westfield was Alana Hill using Magento, and it took nearly 3 months. Now we're at the point where you can onboard a Magento retailer within a day if you're really keen. So it has certainly decreased in time and effort over the years.
And you were with City Beach pretty much very early on. You've been with City Beach for almost 8 years now. And so that's very early on. You must have been one of the very first employees. And if I remember rightly, you've known Ivan since long before you came to City Beach.
Yeah, that's correct. So Ivan and I have been working together on and off for about 15 years. And we first met on an online dating website. So not in that way, not romantically, obviously, but I was the product director and Ivan was the IT director. And he started Omnivore and was working very closely with eBay. One of the first big projects we did was to help eBay with their small, medium-sized sellers. And we managed to reduce the onboarding time for eBay, this is in Australia, from around the average onboarding time from 8 weeks down to about a week or two. So when Ivan needed a product person, I guess he got in touch, and I've been with City Beach ever since. And I've seen it grow from about 20 retailers to over 2,000 now.
About 2,000 retailers. And are the vast majority of those based in ANZ, or have you pretty much gone global?
We're quite focused on the Australia, New Zealand market. We work very closely with the marketplaces, and I think we have good relationships with them. The We haven't gone after the international market so much just yet. It's always something we're looking at. But right now we are very busy in the Australian New Zealand market. We do support retailers who come, from overseas and want to sell in Australia and New Zealand as well. And we've got a lot of, ways to help them. Yeah, at the moment it's predominantly Australia, New Zealand, but we will start to look at supporting more of the international marketplaces in the future.
Awesome stuff. Now, when you're basically, when we think about what your technology and some of the other competing technologies in the marketplace attempt to do, you are effectively a SaaS-based piece of middleware software that acts as a conduit or a connector or plumbing between the merchant's product data, wherever that comes from, whether that be an ERP or a PIM or an e-commerce platform, and you plumb that essential product data, including inventory, price, images, descriptions, and attributes. Mm-hmm. You plumb that data automatically from their platforms into not only marketplaces, but also shopping comparison websites, and basically even Google Shopping and the like. You plumb it anywhere where that data needs to go. And then on the flip side, if the marketplace that they are listing that product data on is a transactional marketplace, i.e. Amazon, eBay, TradeMe, etc., then you will typically pull down those orders from that transactional marketplace and plumb those orders back into, again, maybe an ERP or the e-commerce platform, mm-hmm. or wherever it is that they want those orders to ultimately end up. And you also have connectors with some of the major aggregated shipping carriers or shipping technology platforms like Ship It and Starship It. So you are that essential glue that ties those channels all together in a seamless, easy to use, rapid to onboard, and very cost-effective way. Have I described the technology reasonably accurately?
You've done an excellent job. Would you like it? Would you like a job with us?
Oh, thank you so much. And what was one of the, I guess, the motivations? Now, you told us how Ivan really was scratching an itch, so to speak, because he came out of this place where onboarding people into marketplaces, or onboarding merchants into marketplaces, was very time-consuming, very expensive, very complex, and lots of those integrations were highly bespoke, at least at the very start. And so therefore, it was just super painful to onboard merchants and push in. I remember from the very early days of eBay and how even the likes of Channel Advisor, which of course was around before Omnivore, but you had to work with Swift Productions in Australia, was the big house that designed your eBay store templates and your eBay listing templates. And you had to import those either into eBay directly, and then you had to get them set up and configured, or you had to get them into your listing engine and you had to get those pushed in. And just basically everything to do with listing on shopping comparison websites and marketplaces in ANZ. It was just incredibly difficult, incredibly complex. And so therefore, a lot of brands and merchants just never did it. They found themselves really late to the marketplace party because things were just so difficult. And so if you were a small to medium-sized merchant and you didn't have a lot of money, a lot of time, or a lot of IT or e-commerce or digital capability in the business, you just overlooked those channels just because they were so difficult and they were too unwieldy to really manage at scale manually, i.e., upload via CSV into eBay or upload via CSV into Amazon and download orders via CSV. That really doesn't work once you reach a certain scale. Sure, you can manage the one-off liquidation product that you're trying to get rid of cheaply. Sure, that's fine. But when you're trying to reach scale, I guess that's really what Omnivore allows merchants to do, is to achieve massive scale across multiple channels relatively easily, relatively quickly, and relatively cheaply.
Yeah, that's right. I guess there's a couple of components to that. You need to get a connection between Omnivore and your systems, and there are really easy ways to do that. If you're Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, WooCommerce, we can connect with your platform within a couple of minutes by installing an app, for example. And then once you are on the platform, you can then choose which marketplaces you want to, push your products to, and you've got full control over that. So the actual process of trying to sell on 5 channels, it can save a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of manual processing, mistakes, that kind of thing. We've seen some great results with retailers going from zero to hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales through just simply adding a marketplace into their channels within Omnivore. Yeah, it's great. The thing I love about it is seeing the small businesses do really well, because it's the small businesses that have struggled quite a bit, I think, as well recently. But yeah, that's what I like to see, is seeing those small businesses thrive.
Absolutely. And one of the things I have seen emerge over the last decade is two major pieces of standardization that have started to come to the market that have made onboarding both Omnivore as well as those channels into your business easier. Two things. One is that if you look at almost every single shopping comparison website out there, they can either use a Google Shopping feed or they can use some slight variation on a Google Shopping feed. That's the first.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is there's been a tremendous amount of standardization of marketplace platform technology. So if we think of Marketplacer, or we think of Miracle, or we think of some of the other major marketplace platforms themselves that have allowed these marketplaces to spring up just phenomenally, and particularly if we look at Australia. Australia is the most marketplaced country in the world that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any other country in the world that has as many marketplaces as Australia. It's just phenomenal. It feels like a new marketplace launches every week in Australia.
Yeah.
A lot of those marketplaces, they use an underlying piece of technology like a marketplace or like a Miracle. And so if you've built your integration to a marketplace or a Miracle, and you've built that once, then every single marketplace that deploys that core platform, it's as easy as flicking them on as a new switch without having to do a lot of custom development work on your side to enable that new channel.
Yeah, and obviously every marketplace is different, and each marketplace might have a few changes here and there, but fundamentally often 80% of what we do for one marketplace will also work on another. So there's definitely scalability in terms of the marketplaces that we support and how quickly we can add marketplaces now as well. We're looking at, launching probably a dozen marketplaces this year, which is certainly up from last year or previous years. And you're right, the number of marketplaces in Australia has really grown really quickly. When I first started doing this, excuse me, there was eBay, and that was about it.
Yeah. And then Catch came along, and My Deal, and everybody else. And then latterly Amazon. What, from your perspective, obviously you've got a bird's eye view of the prime marketplaces that are important to merchants, because of course you're a project driven business, i.e. if merchants are asking for a channel over and over again, then it makes sense for you to support it. Right. And from your perspective, how disruptive, because what we've seen globally is that when Amazon enters a new market, they are massively disruptive, right? There might be one or two local marketplaces in a given region or a given country that are massively popular, but usually within 2 to 5 years, Amazon, when they decide to really take on a new market and they decide to go whole hog at it, they become the 800-pound gorilla in that market within 2 to 5 years. And obviously what we've seen is we've seen Amazon announce that they're going to open their largest sorting center in the Southern Hemisphere in Melbourne later this year. They opened their largest warehouse in the Southern Hemisphere in Sydney late last year. They're making some massive moves. They opened up the Amazon Australia, so the Amazon.com.au marketplace, to Kiwis late last year, and free shipping to Kiwis on about 80 of the Amazon.com.au catalog. We still don't get Prime, unfortunately. Amazon is making big moves in Australia. And how have you seen that change the structure? How have you seen that change the face of marketplaces in Australia, given the fact that there were already and still are a huge number of very large, very at scale, very successful marketases in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly competitive. I think that initially when Amazon first announced that they were, going to come into this market, they did a great job with their PR, and a lot of sellers got quite excited about it. And then I guess it just didn't deliver in terms of sales initially. And so it put a lot of sellers, I'm obviously looking at this from a seller's perspective. And so it did put quite a few sellers off. And then also I think every marketplace has different product or data requirements. And sometimes, and some marketplaces, much easier to list a product and get a product up and selling than others. And I think Amazon potentially a little bit harder than some of the others. And so that also puts some of the sellers off, because it's, instead of being up and selling within a week, it can take 4 to 6 weeks, and it forces retailers to really improve their product data as well. But I think, and in some ways, I think Amazon's approach when they first came here was, we'll be a lot bigger overnight, or I think there was just this expectation that they were going to be successful. But I think it's taken probably a bit longer than they anticipated. But we've certainly seen an increase in the growth in Amazon sales across all of our sales in the last couple of years. But it's definitely, they are definitely a marketplace to consider if you've got the right products and the right price.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? The competition and margin will kill you on Amazon, and the CAC will kill you off Amazon. So the retailers are caught in the crossfire, and it's a challenging market, especially as COVID starts to wind down and physical retail starts to reopen. I think that there was obviously a land grab and a gold rush, so to speak, during COVID of new brands going online either for the first time or significantly scaling up their online operations because their physical store states were closed and the like. And it's really interesting to see another phenomenon that I've seen emerge out of Australia, probably more strongly than I've seen in any other country in the world. And that is retailers as marketplaces or operating a marketplace. And whether that be a standalone marketplace that's very clear that it's standalone. When we look at Meijer, when we look at Westfield, when we look at Kogan, when we look at, there's a huge, we even look at Barbecues Galore, who has recently started their own outdoors marketplace. And so we have seen this take shape in a number of different ways, whether it be very clear to the consumer that they're shopping on a marketplace, or whether those marketplace listings are interspersed through the standard online e-commerce experience of the retailer. There's a multiple different approaches to this, and retailers take different approaches for different reasons. But are you seeing that become a major play for merchants in Australia, leveraging retailers as marketplaces and listing their products on their market?
Yeah, I think it's quite niche. There's certainly an opportunity. It's great. At Barbecues Galore, they can, certainly sell their own products, and then they can that without having to source other people's products. They can get their products and have them the other retailer fulfill them for them. And there's certain categories that are complementary to Barbecues Galore, but they might not actually want to sell them themselves. So we are seeing some of those bigger retailers setting up their own marketplaces. Again, I think they're not going to have hundreds of sellers on them. I think they're a lot more selective and more curated in terms of what they're going to have on their own marketplaces. And they're certainly probably a bit more strict about the sellers that they onboard as well.
And how has the Bunnings marketplace fared from your perspective? I've done many articles on Bunnings and Wesfarmers. More largely, I've done a lot of articles, and I've been pretty vocal about what I perceive as a very late to the party, almost an arrogant approach to e-commerce by Bunnings. They're the 800-pound gorilla in the home improvement space. They famously didn't do e-commerce for many years. They actually only started doing e-commerce a few years ago. Then they recently, I think it was early last year, launched their own marketplace as well to try to monetize. They're always in the top 3 of traffic for any website in Australia. So clearly they were looking to monetize that traffic in new ways, which caused them to want to set up a new marketplace. What is your take on brands like Bunnings that were very late to e-commerce or were just completely resistant to it altogether, and then were forced to make some pretty rapid adjustments during COVID, and then laterally adding on a marketplace? Have you seen, do you guys support the Bunnings marketplace or not? And have you heard much noise in the market around Bunnings? Obviously, they famously own Target, and they famously own some other very big brands that are very successful online, but Bunnings was just so late to the party. I wonder how being late to the e-commerce party to begin with affect a marketplace play by some of these big guys like Bunnings.
Yeah, Bunnings they're so big in a way that they can do their own thing, right? In some ways. And it takes a lot to move a big ship, which is going in one direction, and to get it going in another. And we actually worked with Bunnings on their first marketplace play, and we helped them sell on eBay. And that was one of their first steps into e-commerce. And I can't remember when it was, but probably about 4 years ago. And sorry, I should put my phone on silent. And for them, I think they used that as a bit more of a trial to see how all their fulfillment systems worked and that kind of thing. So I don't think they sell on eBay anymore, and they have been investing purely in their own marketplace. Again, they're only looking for probably a couple of sellers in each category to, supplement or complement their own offering. So it's quite curated. We don't actually support it, but we don't get a lot of requests from sellers anyway. If the demand was there, we'd certainly add it. So I can't really comment on how it's going, but I think that a company that size to go and do e-commerce and to do it well, and I think that's one of the key things, is that because they are so big, people have this expectation that as soon as they start doing it, they're going to do it well, or they're not going to have a lot of problems or that others might have. A lot of pressure, I think, for them to do it well.
No question about it. And I think they've done some things well, and other things I think people would again say, look, as big as West Farmers and Bunnings are, why wasn't this better from the start? But as you say, it doesn't mean just because they're a multi-billion-dollar business doesn't mean automatically the first time they do e-commerce that they're going to do it perfectly out the gate, because there's a lot of ducks to get in a row. Many systems have to share data and talk to each other. But if we shift gears to the New Zealand market for just a minute. Now, New Zealand obviously is a much smaller market than Australia. We're a minnow compared to Australia. For many years, Trade Me dominated in New Zealand. They were pretty much the only marketplace. There was 5, 6, 7 major marketplaces over the last 20 years that I've seen come and go that have tried to compete with Trade Me, never could.
Yeah.
And then we have the market. We have the warehouse group setting up the market. Yep. We have Eustace coming in there and doing a great job at setting up the market and being competitive, particularly in the new goods space.
Yep.
In New Zealand, they're pretty much the only one that have been able to foot it with Trade Me. And and in fact, I think between the market and when we look at Facebook Marketplace, those two brands have single-handedly caused some real strife for Trade Me, because Trade Me for many years, they were a monopoly, and they kept raising their prices, their listing prices, their success fees every single year. And it was really ticking a lot of Kiwis off, but they didn't have anywhere else to go. But now with Trade Me Market, Facebook Market, and with the market, if you're a major retailer and you want your brand new goods as a shop within a shop on the market, that becomes a very viable option versus Trade Me. So what is your overall take on the New Zealand marketplace space and how it's evolved, say, over the last decade?
Yeah, look, I think what you mentioned, New Zealand is a bit starved for e-commerce. I think that's probably one of the problems, is that there just hasn't been that many people selling online and having their own e-commerce sites and retailers doing online, selling online in New Zealand. And from where I'm sitting, I'm not seeing the market really taking a massive share of Trade Me. They're growing together. And there was so much opportunity in New Zealand for online sellers. And that's probably why Kogan have launched Kogan New Zealand. And also they've got the Dick Smith brand, and there's other marketplaces coming up through the ranks as well. So there's OnceIt, for example, who I think are the third largest in New Zealand. And surprisingly, actually, we get direct inquiries from New Zealand saying, hey, we want to set up this marketplace. How do we get on your platform? Yeah, I think there's just pent-up demand for buying and selling online in New Zealand. And so Trade Me did have that monopoly for a long time. I think 80%, when we first started working with Trade Me about 7 years ago, I think 80% of traffic in New Zealand went to a Trade Me or a Trade Me site. Now, I don't know what the updated stat on that is, but it's certainly a lot of growth for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. And I think we're still starved, unfortunately. And the reality is pre-COVID, we were sitting at about 9% e-commerce penetration as a percentage of overall retail. Australia pre-COVID was sitting at right around that 12%. At least you guys were in double digits. And then post-COVID, we're coming out and the stats are looking more like we're sitting at more like 12% now. So at least we're in double digits, and you guys went from that 12 to 15% upwards in some verticals and some markets to well over 20% now as a penetration of total retail. But still, even having said that, even at 20% penetration of total retail, we got a long way to go, don't we?
Yeah. And it's funny, I actually last year and the year before, in the last couple of years, I've spent 2 or 3 months of the year in New Zealand and on a farm in the South Island. And it's very easy to get things delivered, but there just isn't as much choice. I was trying to buy a vacuum cleaner and ended up driving into Nelson to buy it, because I actually picked up the phone and a seller in there, and it was easier to do that than it was to get something delivered, what I wanted. So there's not a lot of, I think, variety online, especially if, let's say you go to Google Shopping and you type something and you're looking for something, often there's only a couple of options. Whereas if you do the same in Australia, there's Australia, New Zealand, different countries, different size, etc. There's so many more options, and so I think in Australia, but New Zealand, there's certainly opportunity for online sellers there still.
Yeah, we just go back to those online penetration numbers, and there's a lot of structural issues associated with that. Whilst it's easy to get things shipped, our shipping costs are high. We look at New Zealand Post, Courier Post, they've got monopoly. They are the only ones that have access to PO boxes in this country. And so there's a lot of structural issues going on within the New Zealand market that make it very difficult to be profitable, I think, in New Zealand.
Right.
You could sell a lot of products and you could sell a wide range and all that sort of stuff, but doing it profitably is a whole nother kettle of fish. And I think you're right. I think what's going to ultimately happen here is that a lot of Australian businesses that currently list, say, for example, on Amazon Australia, they are going to access the New Zealand market because Kiwis can buy on Amazon.com.au. They're not going to target New Zealand as a market on its own, but if it's being approached by the major platform providers as effectively a state of Australia, and I know Kiwis will be very offended to hear that. When somebody like an Amazon looks at Australia, right, they say New Zealand is, let's almost lump them into one bucket, ANZ. And so that makes sense that as these large international global brands come down to Australia, it's a pretty short hop, skip, and a jump from Australia to New Zealand. And I think that unfortunately, it's a lot of consumers are going to bypass Kiwi retailers, and I think that is a sad thing, but that's the reality of the market we live in. And for any Kiwi retailers that don't target the Australian market, i.e. they only service the domestic market, they will simply not have the economies of scale to justify having 20 different models of vacuum cleaner. They're going to have two, like you said, to use your example. And in Australia, the market is big enough to support 20 different models of vacuum cleaner. In New Zealand, probably 2 or 3. And so I think it's going to have to go 2 directions. One is a lot of Australian merchants are going to have to get savvy about selling in Australia, selling in New Zealand through both local marketplaces as well as DTC and selling cross-border into New Zealand, because let's face it, the freight costs are so high within New Zealand that shipping across the ditch isn't that much more expensive. And so if you can bring a massive new range to New Zealand that's never been here before, but yes, it costs a little bit more for shipping, a lot of Kiwis will take up that offer. And if you're looking on Google Shopping and you see a listing there that is effectively treated as a local listing, then you're probably going to click on that and you're probably going to at least check it out. And so I agree with you. I think there's some structural shifts that are going to happen by definition, that COVID kicked it off. But I think Amazon is just the tip of the iceberg. They've just stuck their foot in the door. And I think that is the canary in the coal mine of things to come for New Zealand retail.
Yep.
Now, what do you think about these Amazon only brands, these Amazon brand aggregators around the world like Thrasio and some of the other brand aggregators that are buying these marketplace pure plays that have grown up on marketplaces? They might even be an eBay pure play, or in the case of TradeMe, they might be a TradeMe pure play. It's more common, obviously, in North America for these marketplace retailer aggregators. They've taken in billions and billions of dollars of VC funds. But what we've seen over the last couple of months, as VC capital has started to dry up and tighten, we've seen a lot of these aggregators go to the wall. And we've seen a lot of them doing it tough. And it begs the question. It's almost like retail e-commerce ventures and what those guys are doing of buying distressed brands and taking them e-com only. And it does beg the question, does a bucket of crappy brands combined together with economies of scale and maybe unified back office operations, does it make them any less crappy if they're combined? Or in the case of Amazon brand aggregators, if they buy 20 brands that are 1, 2, 3 product brands and they aggregate them together and they try to standardize their back office operations, their logistics, and maybe even some of their other operations like customer service and the like, does it make sense for them to do? And can they consolidate on a single tech stack? And are you seeing much of that starting to happen in Australia, i.e. holding companies that buy 2 or 3 marketplace only or marketplace heavy brands, bring them into the holding company, and then try to standardize their tech stack and take them to scale?
Actually, we've got a couple of customers that are doing that. Yeah. I'm actually not across that part of it too much. So I'm not actually talking to those retailers that are doing that. So I don't really want to comment too much on that. One thing I have seen though is, and everyone would be probably across this example, is Kogan buying the Dick Smith brand. And they took that and they bought it. As you say, it's a distressed brand, but they bought it in-house and they've been quite successful with that and it being purely online. We actually worked with Dick Smith back in the day and on their eBay store back in sort of 7-8 years ago. So yes, it can be successful. And we are seeing we have got one retailer who has bought a few online and they're bringing them together. Even us working with the 3 different brands, they're all on different technology platforms, but we're able to provide one account for example, which probably makes things a little bit easier. But on the whole, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, well, Kogan is famously not just bought them, but they bought distressed furniture brand Matt Blatt as well
Yes.
in May of 2020. Kogan has been on a tear, but then they got caught out holding a lot of stock and inventory, particularly in electronics, and their share price has been slaughtered as a result in some respects. But yet, they keep trudging on, they keep acquiring brands, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they go with these aggregation of brands, because effectively what I've seen them do is, it was funny because I was on Dick Smith, Kogan's new version of Dick Smith the other day, and they're not selling electronics or anything. It was shoes on there. It was almost like another Kogan website, just with the branding of Dick Smith. And I think that I think that there's a challenge with that, in that at what point do you dilute the original brand so much that there's no differentiation between a Dick Smith and a Kogan, right?
Yeah. I guess there's probably still people with their hearts tied to the Dick Smith brand, potentially.
Yeah, and obviously Mighty, when you think about Kogan and their biggest, I think it might be one of their biggest acquisitions to date, when they bought Mighty Ape in New Zealand. So they're really on the warpath. We look at Mighty, we look at Matt Blatt, we look at some of these acquisitions. They're not small acquisitions. They bought Mighty Ape in 2020, in December of 2020, and it was a $128 million deal. So it's definitely not chump change, that's for sure.
I guess it really comes down to what their core competency is. And if your core competency is e-commerce and you can do that well with one brand, then I'm sure you can do it with multiple.
Absolutely. No question about that. And I think that's obviously what they see as well. They say, hey, look, we're really good at e-commerce. We've got some really good back-end systems. We've got some really good logistics and operational platforms and fulfillment technology. And why wouldn't we try to scale as fast as we possibly can? That makes absolute sense. Now, what do you think, if we look out over the landscape of Australia, New Zealand, and marketplaces over the next 12 months, what do you see as, is it going to be more the status quo, Amazon just continuing to take market share slowly away from other marketplaces in Australia? I think we're getting to a place where it feels like there's incredible if we just take Amazon, eBay, and Catch in Australia alone, the amount of catalog overlap between those three must be massive. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it must be massive, because they're all sort of general goods marketplaces. And so they haven't niched down like some of the other marketplaces have. Yeah. And so do you see it being just basically a war of attrition over the next, say, 1 to 2 years, particularly in the Australian marketplace space, where there almost has to be some level of consolidation given the amount of marketplaces? Is that sustainable, do you think, over the next couple of years?
Well, I guess it just depends on how much online shopping is growing. If it's not growing and there aren't any new technologies or new inventions that are going to drive higher adoption, then those marketplaces, they won't grow. But if overall online is growing and more people are shopping online, and improved delivery times and being able to get a skirt delivered from Westfield direct within an hour from the city, even though I'm out in the suburbs, those kind of changes can potentially increase those sales for that particular marketplace. Innovation driving but Amazon, eBay, Catch, I still think there's enough room for these marketplaces. I don't necessarily think that their shoppers are the same. I think Catch tends to attract a more female buyer who is buying and shopping for a family, and quite price eBay obviously is potentially sort of more male skewed, and I think there's different category strengths within those marketplaces. I don't doubt that there's a duplication of inventory across those different channels, but within certain categories, there's certainly strengths and weaknesses across the different marketplaces.
Yeah, definitely. I see, if you look at Catch, we look at their broad range. We look at eBay, they're particularly strong across motor vehicle parts, and there's certain categories, again, as you say, that they dominate. And then if we look at Amazon, we maybe look at home electronics and them being particularly strong in home electronics. So I think we're definitely going to have category leaders continuing to emerge over the next couple of years. But yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see whether the pace of online growth as a percentage of total retail is enough to keep these marketplaces growing at the pace they perhaps have been over the last 2 years with COVID. I think that's an open-ended question, and I think it remains to be seen whether that's possible. Now, when it comes to
I don't think that we're. Yeah, and I was just going to say, COVID really pushed retailers to get online, get onto multiple channels, and online sellers have really seen a massive increase in online sales in the last couple of years. I don't think that type of growth is sustainable. And even talking to the marketplaces at the moment, they're now coming to us and saying, okay, how can we get more sellers onto our platform? Whereas before it was probably the reverse. They would come to us and they'd say, can you get these sellers on? And they're still trying to look for more growth, but it is harder than it was during COVID time.
Yeah, I think all of us working in e-com were trying to drink out of a fire hose during COVID. That's for sure. It was a good time to be in our space, wasn't it?
It was very busy, but we're fortunate to be in an industry that grew as a result of the pandemic as opposed to shrunk or had other challenges.
Completely. We have to be completely grateful. There was a lot of industries that did it much tougher than we did. So yeah, very thankful for that. Now, if we look out over the next 12 to 18 months for Omnivore, apart from onboarding a couple of new marketplaces into the business, is there any sort of functions or feature sets that you think, hey, look, we love Omnivore today, but there's some things that the market is coming to us and saying, we'd love you to do more. And these are the things that we want to do over the next couple of years and bring to the platform that maybe we don't do. Either we don't do it at all today, or we don't do it maybe as fully as we would like to. What does your product development roadmap look like apart from channel specific additions? What does that look like over the next couple of years? Are you quite comfortable with your core feature set, your ability to differentiate how you push out product data to those individual marketplaces and channels? How does that look to you guys?
Yeah, we're in the process of a bit of a site rebuild to improve the overall kind of usability of our product. I guess that's one thing that we're focusing on to make the product easier to use. So we first put the basic, screens together 8 years ago, and it's just grown organically from there. But we want to make the experience of using Omnivore a lot better and easier for our customers. And also, it's not just about getting your products on a marketplace now. It's also how do you then the functionality within Omnivore or to actually increase your sales and improve on the different marketplaces. So there's that area, but we are very focused on, we do a very small part of the e-commerce ecosystem. And we try to specialize on that and, do that one thing really well. People are still hungry for more channels. And so that will always be a focus for us. New channels here, Australia, New Zealand and overseas. And we're always listening to our customers. The more requests we get from a customer for a particular thing, then that's what we also try to focus on.
Love it. Product-led growth is always a good thing, and obviously an attention to detail on the UX, UI components of what you do. As a SaaS platform, you make those changes once, and everybody, those 2,000 merchants that you deal with, they all benefit.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's obviously, how do you guys, that's a really important question, I think, for our audience. How do you guys make your money? Do you charge based on a base platform access fee and then a per channel fee, or do you charge purely on the transactions that come from the transactional channels, or how do you guys make your money?
I guess there's a few different revenue sources. Predominantly though, it's retailers paying, there's a minimum monthly fee or a percentage of orders. If you're a Shopify retailer, the monthly minimum is $74.95 US. So it goes from there, and percent of orders really. And we support all size retailers, small or large. We work with some of the big, retailers like Coles and Chemist Warehouse and things like that. Country Road Group. We do have enterprise pricing plans. So it's really just a percent of orders, but it's across all marketplaces. We don't charge per marketplace. If you're on 5 marketplaces and one's not doing well, that's okay. You won't be charged specifically for that market.
And obviously some marketplaces, which are actually shopping comparison websites, there is no transactions coming through. So effectively, I guess you just pay a fixed fee for that particular, to push product data out to that specific channel.
That's right. You could do Get Price, My Shopping. You could push a Google Shopping feed up to the GMC, and those feeds are all part of your minimum monthly.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, I've started a new segment, and this started about 3 episodes ago, where I turn the tables on myself, and I turn the microphone over to you, and I let you ask one question, any question you want to ask of me, and I will do my very best to answer that question. So that's what I'm doing. I'm turning the mic over to you. It's your chance to grill me. One question, anything you like.
Okay. What development in e-commerce and more so marketplaces do you think will contribute to the biggest growth in the next 12 to 2 years, 12 months to 2 years.
Yeah, look, I guess I'm very much aligned with you. I think that those cross-border opportunities of the existing established marketplaces, both, I think Trade Me trying to do more business across the ditch in Australia, also the market, and vice versa. I think some of those major marketplaces making a much clearer and stronger and more compelling play into New Zealand for Kiwis, and trying to make sure that they're aligned with the merchants that sell on their platform to make sure that they can come up with compelling deals for Kiwis. I think that is a huge untapped opportunity that is just gone unexploited, largely, I think, because of COVID, and domestic demand has been so high that they haven't needed to look across the ditch. But I think as the store estates start to reopen, particularly across Australia, and they're continuing to claw away and look for that growth that is at least going to be better than 2019 pre-COVID, I think a lot of these marketplaces and a lot of these brands are going to be looking abroad outside of Australia for that additional growth. And then I think if we look a little bit further afield, so I think for the next 12 months, it's going to be where can brands find new growth opportunities, and whether that be new marketplaces domestically or marketplaces that can get them cross-border, because doing cross-border properly is really difficult outside of the marketplace ecosystem, and it's very expensive. And so I think a lot of brands, they dip their toes in the cross-border marketplace waters by going via a marketplace, and that makes total sense to do, to assess demand and establish themselves and seed the market. Makes total sense. But I think if we look further afield and we look towards the metaverse taking shape over the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, I think that is going to be the biggest disruptor of e-commerce that we've seen since the mobile device. I really do. I think when Apple comes out with its VR device, it rumored sometime within the next 12 to 24 months, it's going to be a very high-end. We know Apple, they create some of the best hardware in the world, some of the most in-demand hardware in the world. Do I think we're all going to be living in VR in the next year? Absolutely not. Do I think we'll all be spending an hour or more in VR within the next 2 to 3 years? Absolutely not. But I think within the next 5, I think it will become a major deal. And I think these platforms, particularly the marketplace platforms, they're going to have to start thinking about, what does the metaverse look like to us? And I think if they're not looking at that already, they're going to have their hands full in a few years' time. That's what I think.
Right. Ahead of that, before that though, what are you seeing in terms of voice e-commerce? So being able to, hey Siri, add this to my cart, that kind of.
Well, I thought, if we look back a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, I thought that it was going to come much faster than it has. And I think that voice convenience is very nice. I think that the metaverse is probably going to get here now as the next evolution of e-com. I think it's going to get here before voice now. And it's because voice has been in the market for so long, and yet voice commerce when we look at social commerce has taken off, even though the social commerce experience is absolutely atrocious in the West versus China. And there's no in-app shopping, or very atrocious in-app shopping in the West, in Western social media apps. It has taken off far faster than voice. And it was later the party in some respects than voice. And although there's a lot of voice assistants floating around, there hasn't been a killer app yet developed for voice. There hasn't been an essential need for voice like there was for mobile. And so whilst I'd like to think voice will get us there, I think we move to virtualized environments and virtual e-commerce experiences. I think we get there faster with virtual e-commerce than we do with voice. That's just what I'm seeing right now. Now that could of course change anytime. If somebody comes out with a killer voice commerce experience, then I think that could change the game. But so far, despite massive penetration of voice devices in Australia in particular, much more so than New Zealand, we just don't see voice commerce taking off yet.
Yeah, we had a play with it actually, and I got something working, but it's got its challenges, that's for sure.
Absolutely has its challenges. Well, look, Fern, it has been absolutely lovely and amazing talking to you. I really appreciate your time. You've got that seat of the pants view of the business. You've got that seat of the pants view of e-commerce in Australia and New Zealand. You've done amazing things with Omnivore over the last nearly 8 years now. Really respect what you guys do. I know it's not easy. You've built the core infrastructure of the platform now, and that was obviously the hardest bit. That took a long time to get to where you are. And so that persistence has obviously paid off with the thousands of merchants that you have on the platform today. So I really appreciate your insights into the industry. It's been an awesome stroll down memory lane, and really appreciate your time. And I'd love to do it again in maybe another 12, 18 months and see how Omnivore's grown.
Sounds good, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks for listening to the At the Coalface podcast. If you want more At the Coalface, you can subscribe to our premium e-commerce and digital newsletter at the Coalface Digest.